Hello, everyone. This is Father Paul, and I hope you're having a good day. You're listening to Copts in Conversation. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with someone who I know for a long time and who's been studying theology for a very long time. I have the pleasure of speaking with Andrew Youssef. Andrew has taught at academic institutions and universities, including Trinity College at the University of Toronto and the Patriarchal Toronto Orthodox Theological Academy. Andrew is also one of the representatives of the Coptic Orthodox Church at the Canadian Council of Churches Faith and Witness Commission. Andrew's graduate studies focused on Christology, patristics, and ecumenism, which culminated in authoring his doctoral dissertation entitled Comparative Christology, Hypostasis, Nature (S), Will (S), and Energy (Is) in Severus of Antioch and Maximus the Confessor. Additionally, Andrew holds a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies from McMaster University, a Master's of Theological Studies from Trinity College, and a Master's of Pastoral Studies from Emmanuel College. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you and to talk with you. It's been a long time coming. I really wanted to speak with you about your work and about your studies. But first of all, you spent a good chunk of your adult life studying theology.
11 years.
11 years.
Yep.
So that's a lot of commitment, of resources, of time, of energy. What did you learn about the study of theology, and is it for everyone? What led you to this path?
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, ever since I was about 5, I was fascinated by monks and seminarians for some reason. And as a kid, you conflate the two because the only difference is a hat.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And when someone would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I found these people fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because their life revolves around reading the Bible, which was fun for me, and they are spending time in the middle of nowhere. It's quiet. I'm an only child. It just fit. So I'd say I want to be rahbani because I spoke Arabic, and that was my idea of what being a monk is. That's the word I thought it was, even though it's actually rahib. Mm-hmm. And as I realized that's not a thing and that seminary is different and so on, and I was like, okay, no, seminary is what I want to do one day. So that's we're talking about 5-6 years old.
Wow.
But eventually I turned more toward art. I get invested in painting and doing iconography and things like that, until my parents ended up joining seminary back in Egypt, and I would go with them. Mm-hmm. And I preferred some classes to others and some professors to others, and I got special privileges of being a kid who was allowed to be with his parents in the actual seminary. And I'd take down notes after they come out of the exam. I take from them the test and start answering it myself based on what I've learned. On occasion, my parents don't like to probably admit that, but on occasion I'd get answers that they have missed. Then I came to Canada and everything changed. Mm-hmm. I had to learn English from scratch, for starters. And I was planning to do kinesiology. I never actually started to do theology. I started in kinesiology at McMaster University with the hope of being a good Egyptian boy that becomes a doctor.
Of course.
And that quickly just did not happen. Mm-hmm. I was not doing well at all. I was clearly doing something in order to impress my parents and my community, not because it's something I wanted to do that much. And that's when I came across religious studies at McMaster University at a time where it was clear I was not going to continue in kinesiology at all. And I even tried other things in the process. But I came to the realization I have to do something I like. And that's when I pursued religious studies at McMaster University. And one thing led to the other. I finished it, applied for the Master's of Theological Studies at Trinity College because it has an Orthodox Christian Studies program, and it was the only one available in Canada at the time. So I applied for that, got in, finished it. The next thing was to do a PhD. And in that time, I started pursuing the non-academic side of my career, which is to go and actually serve people as a hospital chaplain or spiritual care practitioner. And eventually wanted to take that to the next level and also be registered as a psychotherapist, which I am registered as a psychotherapist qualifying now. So to do that, I had to do also a Master of Pastoral Studies. So there was a time where I was doing a PhD, a Master of Pastoral Studies, and a chaplaincy training unit or a clinical pastoral education unit all at the same time, which was hectic and
to say the
tiring,
least. I mean,
to say the least, and got married in the process as well.
And the same. Oh my goodness! So it's hard to imagine doing 1 degree at a time with all the work that it entails and the studying, the reading, and the writing. 2 degrees and a CPE, and marriage.
Yeah, and work.
And work, of course,
because you have to make ends meet. So that's how much I love it, right? Like it compromised my sleep to a degree, compromised my energy, and so on. But it was, if I were to go back, I think I'd do the same thing.
Wow.
I wouldn't do it any other way with any of these. Is it for everyone? I don't know. Like it's, in the Gregorian liturgy, there's this part where we say, to Christ, you have given us the learning of your knowledge. And I think that's for everyone because it's clearly given to humanity. But there is the difference between, I guess, the primary and secondary levels of learning theology. The primary is when you walk into church and you see a lovely teta by an icon who couldn't particularly articulate anything about the Trinity or Nicaea or Constantinople or any of the ecumenical councils. But she's just in love with God. She has the learning of knowledge in a direct way without the need for words and terms and so on. And I think that is available to everyone who invests the time in being with God and opens themselves to the work of grace. But when we look at academic studies of theology, I generally don't think it's for everyone. I don't think everyone would enjoy it to begin with. I mean, it's a very enjoyable thing for me. I'm someone who loves this, loved it since I was 5, and I'm a nerd, so it works. But not everyone has.
You had that inclination from early on.
Yeah. So I guess I would say it's available to everyone, but it's not for everyone to do academic studies of theology.
Pursue academically.
It's available for everyone and should be pursued by everyone to have the primary sense of theology where you just go for it and learn about who God is and just fall in love with God, really.
Right. You make the distinction between primary and secondary, and how it's all about the primary and is the experience of that lived theology, the participation in the liturgical life of the church, and it all leads to that. And of course, without the work of the theologian, the lived experience can meet with obstacles that sometimes we get distracted by trivial things, and it's the work of the theologian that really puts things in sharper contrast, sharper focus to allow that primary experience of taking place and being, like you said, accessible to everyone, especially for those who are not studying or pursuing theology on an academic level. And you didn't just study theology theologically, you also went across the aisle into religious studies. What was that experience like, studying? Because in academic circles, you can study religion like under theology or under religious studies. And what's the difference between the two, and what was your experience, studying on both sides?
Sure, it's a different experience for sure. Like I remember the first time I walked into the Masters of Theological Studies and we started by praying. To me, that was like, what is going on? Like, did I go to the wrong place? Did I go to like Vespers instead of going to theology class?
Because this was
have
after
that in religious studies.
This was after your religious studies degree.
Yeah. So I started in religious studies, completely secular. And when you do religious studies, it's not just that you're doing Christian theology from a different perspective or from a religious perspective or an outsider's perspective. You're also doing other religions. So I studied a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of Judaism, a little bit of Christianity. Obviously, that's what I specialized in, some Islam. So there is all of that like appreciation for the way other systems of thought work. Because when you're studying in an outsider's perspective, you're not just studying the religion. You're studying the context in which that religion develops, grows, how they do theology, their theology, or how they do their thinking, processing, contemplating, meditating, and so on. So you get to understand points of convergence and divergence throughout, which I thought was very useful, especially like at the time I was doing it for the academic interest, but now as a person who offers spiritual care to people in a multi-faith context, that becomes very useful for me,
useful, for sure.
But to focus on the Christian piece from an outsider's perspective, I would say, or from like the religious perspective, or what is technically called the etic approach, ETIC, I found that to actually not be as distant from theology as most of us would like to think, at least given the professors I had. So I had like the two main individuals that have, actually there are three of them, that have kind of shaped my Christian thinking at that time were Dr. Krecker, who was specialized in Christianity and violence and the New Testament aspects of like Sermon on the Mount and Christian ethics and so on. I had Dr. Whitcomb, whose focus was more on patristics and iconology, which he was phenomenal. He definitely shaped a lot of my thinking. And Dr. Stephen Westerholm, whom I'm still in contact with from time to time. He was known in the faculty as the father of Pauline studies.
Wow. And they're a McMaster.
They're all McMaster. They're all religious studies. They're all technically doing etic outsider's approach, but they were devout and faithful people, and you could tell from the way they taught the faith, or the way they taught the subject, but they taught the subject academically, but with faith. And you could see that in the process of the lecturing, and the process of the way they presented, in the process of the way they tested us and how they examined us and so on. So it wasn't that big a jump for me to go to the Master of Theological Studies, but I can't deny that there were different approaches. It was definitely more pious at Trinity College.
I was gonna say, like, there's reverence.
Yes.
The subject matter, rather than just being cold and distant and teaching about distant people, distant lands, distant ideas.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You can tell, like, when it's like a secular approach, like someone's outsider perspective versus someone from within the community teaching, right?
Yeah, I think, like, to use a very, very concrete example, it was quite something to pray at Vespers at Trinity College Chapel with Father Jeffrey Reddy, and then go back to class and find the same Father Jeffrey Reddy that was just leading this Vespers teach on liturgy.
Right.
That's unthinkable in religious studies in any department there may be. So that to me was, this is it. This is the difference, that you're learning from people, but you're also growing with the same people, and you're praying with these people all at once. And I think that's, once I found that, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I could even take it to the next step and go to like a boarding seminary like St. Vladimir's, where I'd be with people all the time, with that being the sole focus. But that was just not
an option.
That was not an option for me at the time.
Yeah. And it goes back to that same distinction you mentioned earlier of primary and secondary theologies. And it doesn't end, with the end of the lecture. It goes on. This is the life of the church. Whatever it is you're teaching, this is what's being experienced in the church. It's not just book learning. This is life, right? This is the life of the church.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's funny you say that. Whenever a youth or a young man comes to me and asks me like, hey Andrew, I know you study theology, what do I need in order to like learn theology? Or I'm like, go grab the Khulagi, the Book of Liturgical Prayers, and read the whole thing, including Matins, Vespers, and the inaudible prayers of the priest. And when you're done, come and talk to me. Most of the times they don't come back. But when they do, it's like, what's next? I'm like, the Psalmody. What's next? The Agpeya. And it's after all of that has become part of your life that you can start looking at other things. Otherwise, it can really be dry. Yeah. If you're going to study about like, terminology, like, my dissertation title. If you're not invested in theology, it's incredibly boring to talk about things like hypostasis, nature, will, energy. Like, who cares, right? But when you realize that this is talking about the one that you're called to be in love with, and the one you're called to be like, in as much as that's humanly possible, that is Christ himself. Now that reforms your entire mindset. Right. It really does.
Right. So it's not just about getting more information about God. The focus is the experience of God, being in the presence of God, encountering God.
Absolutely. And I think in the process of writing my dissertation especially, I was chatting with my wife and then a few friends about this after. It was really difficult to come out of that and focus again on reading spiritual books and books that actually build my life with God. I was like, I'm kind of relearning now because I was hyper focused on the academics and the terminology and so on.
Of course.
It's like, okay, now time to actually start being a Christian again. Like, what is that like, right? That's the problem with hyper focusing on just the academics without the balance between the academic and the primary theology that I had when I was doing my master's.
And I had a similar experience with one of my early period patristic professors at Trinity. She was mentioning how she is from a religious studies background, and her focus was Old Testament, and how dry it was because the entirety of the field is just saturated with modern biblical scholarship and the documentary hypothesis, and JEDP and splitting passages and and verses and words from this source and that source and this document and that redaction and all these things, and then it became so dry because there's no life in it. It's just all of these theories built up one upon the other, and then after the lecture is done, now what? Like, now nothing. There's just nothing else. Now you get to go home and continue on with your life, but there's no continuation there's no end to it. There's no purpose to it, right?
Yeah, like it almost feels like when I was doing kinesiology and I would go to the anatomy lab and like start dissecting like a body. Well, you have no interaction with that person.
Right.
That person to you is just a corpse. And you're dissecting, you're making cuts and so on. Of course, you respect the person, you respect that this once bore life, and it is still life in a mystical sense, but there's no relationship. There's
parts.
no, it's distant, it's cold, both figuratively and literally, right? It's a corpse.
Yeah.
And
it's dead.
Yeah. And when you do that to the Word of God that's supposed to be living, mighty, and sharper than a double-edged sword,
yes.
Well, where do you think it will take you?
Exactly. And we read that over again in the tradition of the church. That it becomes mere story, just like it's nothing. It doesn't. It no longer becomes the charisma, the witness of the apostles. It's just dead words, dead tradition. It's nothing when it's read outside of the tradition of the church. And then, incidentally, that's what drove that professor into moving into patristics, because she felt like this was not really going anywhere. This is so dry and like there's no life in it. I need something alive. So she moved her field of study into patristics, into the tradition of the church, and then she found like how it all fits together, how it all brings life and is life, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm biased. I think she made the right choice moving to patristics because that's my field. But no, I mean, there is room for the Old Testament to be studied in a very, very beautiful way. But it's unfortunately not the academic way.
Right.
That's just the reality of today. But the good news is in academia, everything shifts from time to time. Like today, that's the approach. Tomorrow is going to be a different one. Back in the day, it was don't even use first person, like, pronouns when you're talking and when you're writing a paper. Now the movement is more toward like actually write out what your biases are. So it really shifts from time to time.
And speaking of biases, interesting how the religious studies approach is almost like ignorant of biases, to the extent that like however they feel about the subject matter is not taken into consideration, and it's just and it's presented as this neutral, objective study of religion, and this is how religion really is, and it's free from all bias, but it's anything but. It's really the bias affects everything, all sorts of analyses and conclusions because of the bias. I remember one time there was I was reading about this 19th century biblical scholar who was in large part credited with the documentary hypothesis, and to him he dated the documents or the sources for the Old Testament based on his biases toward religion. He did not like religion, did not like organized religion. He was German and he hated organized religion. And so whenever he saw something in the Old Testament as indicating any sort of feast or celebration, or he would date that as late, because in his mind, pure religion is natural, it's shapeless, it's formless, it's not organized, it doesn't have rules. So whenever he sees rules, he's like, oh, that must be a later addition, and he would say like, this is coming from a later source. And he doesn't address the biases that are inherent in his thinking, saying like, I have to admit I don't like religion very much, and this is why my conclusions could be touched by these. He doesn't. He presents it as, no, this is how it really is. And in many ways today in that field, whatever you have to, whatever work you do, it's like you either agree with him or disagree with him, and then you use that as a starting point, and then you move off to say why or why not he's right or wrong, right? So you did start your theological studies after your work in religious studies, but in theology at Trinity College.
Correct. So the program, when you actually go on the website, it's intended to be an Orthodox program that encompasses both the Byzantine and Oriental traditions. On the pages of it, at least. And in reality, when I joined, that was honored through trying to collaborate with different churches, trying to get Oriental Orthodox professors to come in. And at some point, I think Dr. Ramiz Bashara, I believe, was teaching a course on Coptic monasticism.
Two, actually, Coptic monasticism and Christianity in Egypt. Yeah. And the Middle East.
So I wouldn't say that it's strictly Eastern Orthodox. It honors both traditions as much as possible. And during the time I was there were times when professors, so for example, Father Jeffrey, whenever he would be teaching a course in liturgics, would invite someone from the Oriental traditions, Coptic, Syriac, Ethiopian, Eritrean, Armenian, and so on, to come and represent their tradition to the rest of the class.
And give a lecture on
their liturgy. While the majority of the faculty is Eastern Orthodox, the program itself should not be characterized as such, I believe, especially that I teach there Oriental Orthodoxy.
That's right.
Right.
I was going to come to that.
So I wouldn't characterize it as specific to one tradition over the other. It's meant to be eventually equally representing both traditions, or rather, I guess it's one tradition from two, or in two traditions. I don't know, however you want to phrase it.
I see what you did there. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not surprising with your work in St Severus and Christology. So it shapes your thinking and even your language. So your time there, were there any polemics? Like, did you feel any, like, man, they really hate Orientals, they really hate us? And did you feel any sort of kind of negativity towards Orientals, Copts specifically? What was the environment there? What was it like?
I would say that if anything, it felt like the opposite. Like Father Jeffrey was very, very welcoming and embracing. Dr. Opperwall, Professor Schneider, God rest his soul, Professor Ledesser as well. So all of these figures were more than welcoming, more than accommodating, more than willing to have me write every paper in their class from an Oriental Orthodox perspective as opposed to an Eastern Orthodox perspective, which is quite funny because almost every time I end up having the same conclusions as they did, or whatever they already had, and I'm using strictly Oriental sources. This is not to downplay the cultural differences even within the Eastern Orthodox tradition and within the Oriental Orthodox tradition, but I'm saying in terms of like the substance of faith as opposed to the way the faith is expressed through culture. It was very much aligned. Suffice it to say, my master's thesis proposal and eventually writing it took place under the supervision of Dr. Opperwall, who's an Eastern Orthodox scholar of patristics, and it was on the humanity of Christ and Oriental Orthodox Christology, and I definitely was writing not in the most, positive way about the way we are evaluated by some of our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters, such as Father George Florovsky or Father Jean-Claude Larcher, and more ancient figures like Leo Fromm, for example. And there was no problem doing that because it's an academic institution, right? You get to write what you believe based on the evidence you have, primary and secondary sources available to you. And you present your facts, and your professor challenges you, and your supervisors, and your committee, and so on. And you eventually write what you believe, provided you are able to back it up with sufficient evidence. And once you have that, you're good to go. So that has been my experience over there. All the courses that pertain to art or liturgy and so on had quite the amount of Oriental Orthodox representation as well that I was satisfied with personally. If anything, I would argue that many times we as Copts, that's a trend among Coptic youth, to be kind of self-loathing toward their own tradition, much more than others might be
from
toward
outside,
us from outside.
Yeah.
And it's important not to project that as well.
Right.
And I think one of the fascinating things as well, like as we're talking about the way humans respond to things, is that the majority of the individuals that we're teaching at Trinity College were in fact converts. So Father Jeffrey himself, Dr. Ladouceur, Professor Schneider, Dr. Opperwald, none of these is actually born in Orthodox Christianity.
They're all converts.
And the stereotype typically is that if you are a convert, that you're more of a fundamentalist. Right?
Yeah. The tendency is, yes.
And that did not happen at all. Quite ironically, it was almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? So
they maintain a very balanced line.
Yes. Yeah. And it's good to acknowledge differences. I'd argue it's good to acknowledge differences between even the Oriental churches among themselves. Like I did my work on Severus. Severus is now venerated in the Armenian Apostolic Church, and that's okay. There is, Greek or Byzantine form of Orthodoxy, and there's the Slavic for the Eastern Orthodox.
Right.
That's okay. They will disagree on certain people, and that's okay. It's part of the human condition, I think, to have a little bit of that healthy disagreement. And it's actually the only way to know if you love someone or a church loves a church is if you can disagree and maintain love and even better communion. Yeah. If you're always in agreement, then you just love yourself that you see in the other. Yeah.
Very true. And that was my experience also at Trinity. I mean, I didn't find that it was kind of playing down Oriental thought or sources or opinions or anything like that. And in fact, it was the opposite. It was like engaging with these things head on. And I find it very interesting that your master's thesis was on, like, it wasn't kind of finding a safe topic to research and write a thesis on. No, it was like you went straight to the most kind of like heated area, and you did your thesis there.
Yeah, and it was so I'm generally not a very safe person. That's like in general who I am as a person when it comes to like
that
the
reflects
things
in your choices and your decisions.
Yeah, like I mean I did theology at a time where no one pretty much did in the area I grew up in. So I now live in Toronto, but I grew up in Mississauga, and at the time there was no one I'm aware of that was studying theology full time, making it strictly their career in the churches of Mississauga at the time when I started. So I'm okay taking a bit of risk and unsafe options, and it actually felt incredibly safe exploring this. At no point did I feel like I was doing something inappropriate or something wrong, or at no point was it even suggested that I should look at something else or explore something else. It was like, yeah, let's do it.
Well, did you feel any kind of pressure to toe the line, so to speak, to kind of say things that your supervisor would agree with personally?
So the master's thesis is relatively short. Right. So that didn't really occur that much. It was like one invitation from Dr. Opperwald that now that I look back with the benefit of hindsight, I should have, gone with it, which is to try and apply the principle of charity as much as possible to every single figure from the past.
Right.
I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
Right. I was still growing. When we talk about my master's thesis, we're talking about 2019, so 5 years ago. You learn a lot as you go,
and you mature and all that, of course, you're thinking, and exactly.
Yeah. When the time came for writing the dissertation, like the doctoral one, that's 245 pages. includes Greek, Syriac, Latin, and French parts in terms of the sources consulted and the things used and so on. And as a result of that, there are times when my professors would actually disagree with what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I had a primary source and a secondary source, that was the end of the discussion.
Right.
That's how academia works. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that when you're in the process of writing and defending your dissertation, you're seen as someone who's like very close to becoming a colleague.
Right.
Right. Like it's literally like a matter of 15 minutes between when you were, so and so versus Dr. so and so.
Right.
When they deliberate, and 90% of the times you end up actually passing. It's a question of with some revisions or without revisions, right? With that stage. And it's okay to disagree. Like I remember in the defense, my external examiner was Father John Bear, right? Who, like, I jokingly from time to time say, like, if the Egyptian pantheon of gods had a god of patristic theology, it would probably be Father John Bear. And of course it was like, I've known him, I have spoken to him prior in passing in academic settings, but I have obviously been intimidated by like how much he knows, and I'm still like, an aspiring scholar.
Right.
But having the opportunity to be with him in a very fruitful discussion in my dissertation for an hour and a half with him and the rest of the committee and so on, it was a phenomenal experience. I came out of it having learned more, and I still disagree on certain things here and there. I might change my views in the future, I might not. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about academia, is that it invites you to have that, I don't want to even call it humility, because I don't think it's humility, it's more of the self-awareness that there is a good chance you're going to say something and then you're going to be wrong. Or it's not going to be perfect and you have to change your mind.
Right.
And that's not a sin, that's a mistake.
Right.
And there's a difference between a mistake and a sin. And even a sin you can repent from,
right.
but like you can make a mistake and amend it later on. I mean, we have St. Augustine, who wrote a bunch of recants, I think.
At the end of his life, that's right.
At the end of his life, right? Yeah. Who's to say that I am, or anyone in the 21st century is smarter than St. Augustine? Well, right. I don't know. Like, or, I know for sure I'm not smarter.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So I'm not going to go and pretend like I have all the answers or the final say on anything. And I think that's also part of, that's maybe something the church can borrow from academia, to acknowledge that sometimes people will say something and it's not perfect. Just have a conversation.
Right.
Instead of saying heresy, just have a conversation, talk about it. Ask the person what they actually mean by that. Because 99.9% of the time it will be just a matter of semantics. And we just need to find a pastoral way of saying things.
The charitable way, the ironic way.
That's yes, right. Absolutely. Like, there's a lot you learn in theology that when you're invited to give a talk in a church, or when you're invited to give a sermon by a priest, and in my case, you have to, filter. Not everything you learn in academia belongs at the pulpit or in a talk. That's right. And the other way around as well. And learning that is something that people develop over time. It's a muscle. You have to train it. And
a lecture definitely is different than a sermon, a homily.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, learning that takes time. I know for a fact in my case, it took a bit of time to learn it. And I'm completely okay acknowledging that. Yeah. And that's thanks to academia, I would say.
I want to touch a little bit on your master's thesis. What did you focus on in that dissertation?
For the master's thesis, so it was the one on the humanity of Christ, and at the time I had to select who are the people I'm going to talk about, and my attempt was to work on Dioscorus, very, very briefly, just in the context of setting the stage, not in any sense going in depth, and his altercation with Leo from. And all of that. So that was like essentially just the introductory part of the masters.
So briefly, what's the story here?
The story here is very difficult to communicate briefly, but I'll do my best. Okay. So in essentially, the Council of Ephesus has taken place. Nestorius is anathematized. St. Cyril of Alexandria emphasizes speaking about the unity of Christ by using terms such as Christ being one from two natures, by speaking about one hypostasis, by using his mia physis formula, or the one nature, or the one feces. It's best to say feces because nature is a questionable translation, but that's a different conversation for a different time, I guess. And he kind of has all of these parameters to ensure that people understand that Christ is one and that he's not two persons or two separate beings. Fast forward 20 years after the Council of Ephesus, what we see less than 20 years later is that an archmandrite from Constantinople by the name of Eutyches kind of takes that and kind of blows it out of proportion. It seems he was very uncoachable in a way. He would say something, say the opposite. People would tell him to either listen to the hierarchs or just stop talking, and it seems like neither were an option for him. He essentially goes somewhere, says something unorthodox, gets anathematized for it, goes elsewhere, says an orthodox thing, gets exonerated, and then the people who've anathematized him are assumed to be the ones in error. And that eventually leads up to the Council of Chalcedon that was attempting to settle all of this. And in that process, we start seeing St. Dioscorus, a saint of the Oriental Orthodox Church, who is like legacy of Cyril all the way. Anything else that might have been a compromise should be like put to the background for now, because we have problems still lurking. There's still people in Antioch that are, venerating people like Theodore of Mopsuestia, the teacher of Nestorius, and so on. So let's keep things Cyrillian as much as possible. And then there is Leo of Rome, who's saying there is more to the tradition than Cyril. And there is the Latin Christianity that speaks of two natures, not separating the two natures, but speaks of two natures. And it's there that what happens is that Dioscorus is seen as almost saying one nature in a heretical sense, just by association, guilty by association. In fact, the Council of Chalcedon does not anathematize him for his faith, but rather for having exonerated Eutyches and for having been accused of using violence at some points. And there was pretty much no evidence for that at all. And on the other side, you have Leo, who's saying we can speak of two natures in order to ensure that the likes of Eutyches are not misunderstanding what Cyril is talking about. And it's around that the Council of Chalcedon takes place. St. Dioscorus is mistreated and exiled, and it's because of that we have the churches that accept the Council of Chalcedon and the churches that don't, and we as Coptic Orthodox Christians do not accept the Council of Chalcedon. And because of that kind of whole rhetoric of guilty by association, we find that our church has been accused of saying or compromising or denying the humanity of Christ. And I started to actually look at that by examining primary sources from the inheritors of this tradition, namely Timothy II of Alexandria, the successor of Dioscorus, Shenouda the Archmandrite, who was a monastic figure.
Contemporary.
To the controversy, for sure. And Philoxenus of Mabog and Severus of Antioch. Eventually, because of space, as you mentioned, I had to cut...
Philoxenus of Mabog is...
So Philoxenus of Mabog is a Syriac Orthodox saint. He is the easiest way for a Copt to know who he is. Every Copt knows Severus of Antioch, who is mentioned right after St. Mark in the Commemoration of Saints in the Liturgy of St. Basil. Philoxenus is the person that essentially presented Severus to everybody so that Severus can become Severus of Antioch, become Bishop of Antioch. So that's what he's about. He's a monastic figure, a bishop, a person that wrote about theology, but also wrote about spirituality and so on and so forth. Pretty phenomenal figure. And I think that what happens is that I have to eventually discard Shenouda the Archmandrite, and I ended up using that for a paper later on in a
just
conference.
Because of the
just
space.
because of the space. Just because of space.
It's always you have to cut out things and
and it's incredibly frustrating because you put your mind and heart into this thing, and then you're told, sorry, the space doesn't allow for it.
It's too much. It's too much here. Right.
So I end up having the three figures. I talk about their their way of expressing how the humanity of Christ is there, intact, concrete, animated, real, present in every sense that your humanity and mine is, while also saying Christ is one.
It's very important.
And that's what that master's thesis was about, pretty much.
Amazing. Why do we say our teacher Dioscorus? Why not Saint Dioscorus?
I've heard all kinds of hypotheses about this. I don't like any of them. So like one of them is to say that he's being equated with people like Origen and like people who are not as, astute theologically. I find that to be incredibly non-plausible because first of all, he's referred to as Saint Dioscorus in other areas.
That's right.
Right? Like in the tradition. So you find in I think the Morning Doxology is referred to as Saint, I believe.
Saint, yes.
And you go to the Syriac Orthodox liturgy, one of the very few Alexandrian bishops to be mentioned by name in the commemoration of saints
is Saint
Dioscorus.
Wow.
So if our Syriac Orthodox brothers and sisters are calling him that in their liturgy, what are the odds that we as Copts are not?
That's right.
Right? So no, he is saint. I don't care who says what, as far as the church is concerned. But as far as why he's called our teacher, I don't know if actually our teacher was a way of downplaying anything. I wonder if it was actually trying to say something about that his role is real and important and good. And without further analyzing the truth of that, I think it's important to also highlight the fact that when it comes to who's a saint in the church, it's not just a matter of piety. It's not a matter of being like we have that kind of European understanding of the saint as a gentleman. That's not what saints are, right? Like Constantine was the furthest from that. If you actually want to find someone who was similar to Constantine in history, it's probably King Herod, right? People who are literally murdering their children in order to secure their throne.
Wow.
But he's a saint because he calls the Council of Nicaea, and as a result, he preserves the unity of the church.
Right.
Origen of Alexandria, on the other hand, one of the most pious human beings to have ever walked the earth, perhaps one of the most intelligent people to have walked the earth as well. Because of a few things here and there that he might have said or might have been attributed to him, that ended up fragmenting a little bit the church with people claiming to be Origenists and claim to be in his tradition who were not always really following his tradition or understanding him correctly. And we end up finding that Origen is now either considered a heretic in some churches or considered a scholar, but not quite a saint or a church father. Even though he essentially trained every other church father that we exonerate.
The Cappadocians.
The Cappadocians. And Saint Gregory the Thaumaturgos that we actually commemorate.
Yeah, that's right.
He's direct disciple and direct student of Origen. Yet Origen doesn't make it to sainthood. So it's not always about piety. It's not always about holiness. In the sense that we might think of now as modern people. Sainthood was much more than that in the past. It was a much larger thing. And teaching and preserving the faith of the church from either real or perceived Nestorianism is a sign of sainthood.
Right.
So as far as the church is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, he's our teacher, Saint Dioscorus.
That's right. And teacher is a title that it's not a denigration of the person. It's something that acknowledges his role. We call St. Paul our teacher.
Yes.
Right? It's not something to kind of lower his status and kind of like say like, oh, he's only a teacher. Like a teacher is
a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Right? Like it's like there was a time in the Church of Alexandria where almost the dean of the School of Alexandria was borderline more important than the Patriarch of Alexandria. Like in the very
more
early...
More powerful, more influential.
Yeah. Like
more connected.
I'm talking the first 2 centuries, really, of Alexandria, right? And that speaks volumes about what it means to be a teacher. Right. I mean, Clement of Alexandria writes about teaching and pedagogy and the pedagogue and the difference between the pedagogue and the teacher and so on. Notice how he doesn't say anything about the Patriarch. Even though like the Copts and the Alexandrian Church have always loved their Pope. And I've called him like, there's a reason he was called Pope. It's because he's Papa. And that was actually given to the Bishop of Alexandria as a title before Rome ever had the Bishop of Rome be called Pope. And it was for very different reasons, because one of the patriarchs of Alexandria goes out of his way amid persecution to go and outreach his flock. And people are like, that's dad. That's father. That's papa.
Yeah.
And it sticks to everyone thereafter. But still, the influence was for a long time in the hands of the teacher more than anybody else. The teacher who acted as dean of the School of Alexandria.
So that puts things in much clearer perspective.
Yeah.
And before I move on to the main focus of our conversation today, I want to also ask you about your book that you published, midway through the COVID pandemic and the shutdowns and all that stuff, and then you published a book. So how did that happen?
Well, how did it happen? I had a lot more time on my hands because I wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
Right? That's how
No one
COVID
was.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the reason I wrote it is because every other person would message me and ask me, this priest says this bishop says that. Is it wrath of God? Is it like this or that or the other thing, that COVID is happening and shutdowns are happening?
Right.
And like I'm trying to be as Christian about this as possible, but a lot of times people were not very Christian about their answers, or very not pastoral about their answers. Because when you say that COVID is the wrath of God, and every other family has a person who dies from COVID, what are you saying about that person that died?
People immediately start thinking like, what have I done to earn the wrath of God?
Has he sinned, or has his parents sinned that he was born blind, right?
Exactly.
And it also logically inconsistent. Like, does God have wrath against people who have asthma more than the people who don't, because COVID affected them more?
Right.
And is it that
and
God has
compromised?
Yeah.
Somehow,
somehow they have angered God by their
More
lack of
than-
immunity. Like,
more than have their immune system intact.
it was
All
a lot
these
of things
questions
like
come
that.
to mind, yeah.
And if it's about the religiosity, well, it was hitting China, a predominantly atheist country, and it was hitting Italy, a predominantly Catholic country.
Right.
So it's clearly not about their faith, and it's clearly everywhere, right? And is it even right to see a disease and your first kind of knee-jerk reaction is to be like, is it God, is it Satan, or is it us? Like, is that the way to go? Is that how the church approached these questions in the past? The church definitely used every opportunity it had to make it an opportunity for a call to repent. That's not wrong. That's absolutely perfectly okay. Are you happy? Repent. Are you sad? Repent. Are you healthy? Repent. Are you sick? Repent. Right? But if you make it so that it's almost that God is making this happen in order to get people to repent, paints God in a way that really goes away from him being Father God, right? Which is the beginning of the title of the book, Father God or Mother Nature. On the other side of this is the people who have that inclination to look at a beautiful sunset and say, oh, Mother Nature is so beautiful. And then a problem happens, it's like, oh, God, why are you doing this to us? Well, can you just like pause and think about that? Like, it's either both come from the same source or they don't, right? And it's a question of also like, what's a direct cause, what's an indirect cause, and so on. I think for me, writing this helped me help a lot of people read what the voices of the early church were about what it is that our perspective should be when we see inconveniences, disease, death, and all of that. And the thing that, I guess the normal response to this is to, 1, repent, 2, look for ways to serve people, which there was plenty, and 3, at the very least, learn not to harm, and 4, exercise your ministry as a priest of creation to pray for the salvation of the world.
Right.
And if instead of all of that, you're thinking about who caused it, 99% of the times, it's you not sanitizing your hands, rather than God or Satan or some metaphysical being. Right. I can only speak for myself. I don't think I'm at a level where, Satan will envy me and therefore give me a disease the way he did with Saint Moses the Strong, my patron saint. I'm not there. And I don't think I'm at a place where, God will give me this because he knows I can endure it, because he knows I can't. And I think the majority of the Christian people need to kind of keep themselves in check in terms of seeing where they are in relation to God, because there is that whole assumption that everything has to do with metaphysics. And there is room for that. I'm not denying that. But it when you reduce it to that, it's almost falling into kind of a neo-monophysitism, right? Where you're really highlighting the divine and the metaphysical, and you're discarding the human.
Right.
And then there's the other extreme of making it almost an Aryan or an historian kind of perspective, where it's like humanity. All about humanity, yes, and right. God has no business in this. It's our Father who art in heaven, and this is happening on earth, right? And I guess the key is to find the Aristotelian mean, where virtue lies. Find that royal path in the middle. And that's what the book was about.
And it makes sense that a lot of people were experiencing fear and uncertainty and confusion, and the drive to try and find answers and meaning and trying to figure out why, and focusing on the question of why, which is almost always during a crisis or trauma or anything, the last thing you're able to find and the least useful thing is the answer to the why question, right? And for a lot of us, it was all about why is this happening? And some answers driven by fear and confusion can only generate more fear, more confusion, more frustration, right? But as it turns out, this wasn't your only book. You kept going.
Yes.
So at the beginning of 22, Oriental Orthodoxy unveiled. And this book also played a major role and filled a need for a lot of people that were asking questions like, what book can I give someone who's interested in our faith and they want to get started?
Yes.
And the usual answers we had, a list of usual suspects, most of which were either too old or badly translated, or not too old in the sense that they were incorrect, but they were just badly translated, or things from other traditions, namely Eastern Orthodox, like the Orthodox Church or the Orthodox faith by Metropolitan Callisto Square.
Yes.
And this book filled this niche, kind of this need for something to introduce people, like something that people want to give to a friend who's curious, who's a seeker. Where did the idea for this book come, and how did it kind of end up in a book rather than, I don't know, it could have been any number of other things, but you put it all together in a book?
It started when I was an undergrad. A big part of my undergraduate time was at least the idea, not the writing of it. In undergrad, we had Coptic clubs, and eventually they were rebranded as Orthodox Christian to invite all Oriental Orthodox to join. And during that time, we started doing outreach to campus. Tell people when we meet, come join us for tasbaha, or come join us for a talk and pizza. Usually the meeting with the pizza won, but that's neither here nor there. And
we're going to talk about a little bit about the St Severus. It was the Coptic club of his day.
Yes.
Or the Orthodox club that brought him to church, brought him to faith.
Exactly. Exactly. So campus ministry was something that was like really integral. It was really part of my life. Especially after I found myself in religious studies and was able to study and manage my time properly and not be always worried about probation and failing and so on, I was able to dedicate more time to campus ministry between McMaster, and occasionally I helped friends in Waterloo as well. And we would run into that question at the table. We would be handing out Bible verses or icons or, chocolate milk or hot chocolate or whatever, right? And then they would ask us about, recommend a book. I want to learn about
that
this.
That question always came up, yes.
And it always was an awkward pause.
Yeah.
And I was like, something got to happen about this? I have no idea what it is. At the time, I wouldn't have thought that I would be the one to bridge the gap at all. I was just like, a kid in religious studies, still debating what I'm going to do next. And I definitely didn't have the means of writing anything, let alone a book. But at the time, starting with my master's, I started feeling that I'm being invited to give talks in different places. Sometimes it's in a servants meeting. Sometimes it's a series on like fundamentals of the faith and things like that. And it's like, okay, let's look at that. And I would try and make a curriculum of sorts, and it would be like Christology, pneumatology, church fathers, tradition. And I was like, you know what? It feels like I already have the majority of the material. It's a matter of putting it together. But I still didn't start writing. What I did instead is that I started using the advantage of being in one of the most multicultural places in the world, namely Toronto. And I started going to parishes from every Oriental Orthodox Church available in the GTA. Wow. From like each jurisdiction, I selected a parish that I attended a service in. So that when I'm writing, I'm not just writing on an ivory tower as an academic. I'm writing as a person who has met the people and sat with them and spoke with them and so on. And
by the way, this is not an experience that's available to many people in many places. Like Toronto, we're really blessed to be able to go to an Armenian church, a Syriac church, an Ethiopian region. Like you're able to do all of these things.
Absolutely. Like from my current place of residence, 20-minute radius.
20 minutes. Wow.
20-minute radius. 2 Coptic parishes, or 3, at least 2 Ethiopian Orthodox, 1 Syriac Orthodox, a little further to get to an Armenian parish, but not too far, all right there.
Wow.
So it's quite amazing what we have. And I mean, to our listeners, like if you're somewhere close to an Oriental Orthodox parish, there's nothing to stop you from going and even taking communion. We're in full communion as Oriental Orthodox churches. Yeah. But yeah, like it was beautiful having that, seeing that, and
not just reading about it, but experiencing it.
Right. Like I'll be honest. Like I don't know Amharic. I don't know Gas. I don't know Armenian, classical or modern. I was writing based on 2 things: seeing the people, seeing how they pray, and finding translations of their books. And having the advantage of knowing Arabic as well as English, I was also looking at things that got translated to Arabic, especially from the Syriac and Armenian churches that reside in Arabic-speaking lands. And I put that together, tried to synthesize as much as possible, or rather harmonize, because synthesize is very, very technical a term. Yeah. And the book came out. That was it. Like there were times where I was writing and I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. There were times when I was like, okay, I have no idea. I have to go and consult a bunch of things. And the main challenge was to balance the authors as much as possible between pre-Chalcedonian, post-Chalcedonian, and then when you're doing post-Chalcedonian, you're really dividing it as much as possible between the 6 Oriental Orthodox churches. But it was a beautiful journey. I know for a fact that has helped 2 people who were from non-Orthodox churches join specifically the Oriental Orthodox Church after reading it. I'm not saying that it was the reason they moved, but it was like they have spoken to me about it being a stage in their conversion to Oriental Orthodoxy in particular. So I think it's doing its job, and I know for a fact that it's being used in some parishes as the kind of the manual for catechesis for converts and people who are interested in joining the Orthodox Church.
Very nice. And personally, I have recommended this book to several people who have come asking this very same question. Like, I have a friend that I want to give something to as a way of introducing them. And what I love about the book isn't just kind of stating facts and leaving it up to the person. It's written by an academic, so it's very well referenced. And it provides references, it provides sources, it provides a way of further reading.
Yes.
Right? If you want to find out where this came from and you want to read more about this particular saint, this particular idea, this particular thought, you can go to this source. This is where I got it from. And you can read more and you can ask more questions. And like, it's not kind of presented as an end in itself. It's kind of presented like as a guide along the journey, along the path, along the way.
I don't think any Orthodox book should ever be an end of itself. And I believe that firmly, and I make sure I apply it in everything that I write, in the sense that, like, one of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy is that we don't have a formal, church-approved catechism that represents the entirety of the tradition, the way the Catholic Church, for example, has a catechism, which is both beautiful and frustrating, right? Because sometimes you don't know, like, where's the final word on this. Right. But sometimes that's actually providential in the sense that there's no final word on this because it's a mystery, and you don't solve the mystery, you participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's right.
if
It's not a puzzle to be solved, it's a
exactly,
mystery.
and if the book is not inviting you to do precisely that,
Yeah.
then it has failed. If people read this book and they're like, okay, now I know everything there is to know about Oriental Orthodoxy, well, no. If anything, I don't want the book just to invite you to read more. I want the book to invite you to write your own introduction to Oriental Orthodoxy if you have the training to do that.
Right.
There's no reason there's only the one book about Oriental Orthodoxy that, a guy in Toronto wrote. There's room for every single, diocese of every Oriental Orthodox jurisdiction to do precisely that. Commission someone to write it, or someone writes it out of the goodness of their own heart, and make it available.
That's right. I guess in another way, it's not like the book is not a dead end. It invites you to journey deeper, to do more work, to participate. It's not just kind of giving you answers. Here are like the kind of books like where here are 10 questions and here are 10 answers, and that's it. Like it seems like a dead end. Like it doesn't invite conversation, doesn't invite further thought and further reading, and it just kind of shuts it down. And it says like, this is the answer, just move on with your life, right? But this book, I like the fact that it's very well referenced and it provides that, and yet at the same time it's very accessible. Like the language is very simple. It has some technical terms, but even the technical terms are explained and kind of presented in lay terms. You don't need to be a specialist, which is exactly the kind of book you need for the inquirer, right?
I think because I knew the audience, the ideal audience for it, I wrote it with that in mind. I also wrote it like while thinking to myself every time, how would an academic write this paragraph? But also, how would a chaplain write this paragraph? You got to sit with the people. If you sit with someone who's suffering, and the first thing that comes out of your mouth is theocracy, or sorry, not theocracy, theodicy. Yeah. Sorry, you'll get a blank stare. People don't want technical terms. People don't want something to fill their head. They want like a food for their spirit, to feast on the divine presence. Right. And that cannot happen if every other word is requiring you to grab a dictionary and, try and find out how to actually better understand that sentence, where the whole point is for the author to really say, look at me, I'm so smart and I have a mastery of words. That's not my style. That's not how I do things. And also, even if it was, I couldn't do that because I'm a fob at the end of the day. So I grew up in Egypt.
It makes it so that like, it's almost like disingenuous, like you're hiding behind the terms to get into real conversation, real stuff. Like I find that usually like when things are too technical, it's almost a question of like if the author really understood what he's trying to say or what she's trying to say, and maybe that's why they stay at the level of heavily technical language. Right.
I mean, the reader is often someone who's having a difficult day, or is having, difficult time in their lives. And if your book is only adding more difficulty, like, I don't think it's doing its job.
It's not very charitable. It's just going to make them have a worse day, right?
Yeah.
I know you have published a number of articles as well.
Yeah.
But I want to move on for the sake of time to your PhD dissertation. So St Severus of Antioch. He's not Egyptian. He's St Severus of Antioch. And one of the most famous stories we know about him is that in the Synaxarium, where he's standing in the church, but he's veiled, and the priest starts praying the liturgy and doesn't find the oblation. And the miracle of discovering the angel telling him that the patriarch is here, and finding out that he was in fact like in the church, but disguised because of persecution and exile, and taking refuge in the Egyptian desert. So this is the most famous story, but his life is a lot more interesting than just that one story.
Absolutely. So first of all, to just briefly comment on the story you shared, the older sources of it suggest that it might have been actually more of a story that originated as a means of stating something about the faith, because the churches in Egypt and the monasteries were divided over the question of Julianism, which we can go into, but it was a heresy that was widespread at the time, and that it might have been that the oblation was hidden to make a statement about the faith of the people celebrating being incorrect, and that Severus's faith is the correct faith. So there are different versions of the story in history, and so on. But like the jury's still out on which one is the more accurate story or the more accurate rendition of it.
And the one we actually have in Synaxariums,
it's just where the oblation disappears because there's a patriarch, and it's a matter of the clergy and the hierarchy of the church. But the other one is actually about the faith of the church.
Oh, the faith of the church,
right?
Wow.
That's
emphasizing a different aspect.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
I mean, as a side note here, I hope that's an invitation for our Coptic Orthodox priests in the GTA and you know all of North America to actually mention the Patriarch of Antioch. You know, like in the liturgy, it's often skipped, and it's just one small name. You know, More Ignatius Ephraim. Like especially here in the GTA, like the youth actually interact, Coptic and Syriac youth, and they go to each other's churches and liturgies, and you go to the Syriac liturgy and you hear the name of Pope Tawadros being, you know, mentioned, and you come to, and then they you know repay the visit, and then their patriarch is not mentioned, and it was pointed out to me a few times by our fellow Syriac Orthodox brothers and sisters. I mean, the first person we mentioned after Saint Mark, who brought us the Christian faith to Egypt, is St Severus of Antioch.
Severus, yeah.
So
before any of the other, before Saint Athanasius,
exactly.
before Saint Severus,
yes,
it's Saint Severus of Antioch.
So I hope it's an invitation to mention the contemporary ones as well.
And on that note, actually, every time I go to St. Moses Abbey in Texas, and I'm praying the liturgy there, and one of the fathers, the monks, is praying, and then I don't mention the names of any other patriarchs. He kind of reminds me, like, no, we have to mention their names, because they mentioned all their names in every liturgy.
It's also a statement about ecclesiology, that the church is not just the Coptic Church. The church is the Oriental Orthodox Church that exists in 6 different traditions, 6 different rites, 6 different, you know, rites is loose because there are some churches that share the same rite, but you get the point.
I see the point, yeah.
In terms of Severus, he begins his life as almost everyone in that era, you'll hear a story where he was from a pagan background and so on, and some would say no, actually he was just not yet baptized and he eventually got baptized, and it would be weaponized. So some will say that no, he must have been a pagan and that's why he ended up being a heretic, for example, part of a heretical church, when someone is looking at Saint Severus who's not from the Oriental Orthodox Church, or someone who's Oriental Orthodox will say actually no, he was a pagan yet he found the truth, or he was not yet a Christian but found his Christianity later on in life with actual real conviction. So you see with hagiography a lot of reading into the text and doing some kind of eisegesis, kind of reading meaning into it even though it's not really there in the story,
and presenting the story in a certain way, for a certain end, for a certain purpose, right? Exactly.
But at the end of the day, he eventually gets baptized relatively older, which was the normal practice back then. People like St. Gregory Nazianzus and St. Basil get baptized relatively older.
We just mentioned, we're talking about Emperor Constantine.
Well, that guy is on his deathbed, so that's a different story altogether. But with him, because he encounters Christians, is befriended by Christians, embraces the Christian faith.
In college, during his studies, right? In Alexandria.
Yes.
Right?
Was it Alexandria?
I believe he went to Alexandria to study, but it could have been that his higher studies were somewhere else.
I don't remember exact geography, to be honest. I'm all about the technical terms, not
It was campus ministry.
Yes, absolutely. No, the campus ministry part is non-negotiable. Regardless of where it was, it was
amazing. Like even back then, it was working.
It did. Yeah. Gave us a church father right there.
That's right.
He becomes a monastic. His life in many ways actually mirrors that of St. John Chrysostom, because he goes to the desert, becomes super duper ascetic, to the point of his health being compromised.
And that's a technical term, super duper.
Super duper, yes. Very technical.
Yeah. That's more than very.
Yeah,
and slightly less than extremely. Super duper is like right between.
I mean, I don't know, because
extreme asceticism and very,
I mean, he literally like really got his health wrecked. That he had to go into the world or into like the monastery as opposed to being
Out
ascetic
on his
or
own.
out on his own as a hermit
Yeah.
because of that asceticism. So I don't know if I'd put it under like
Really?
extreme or super duper, but I mean,
Yeah.
it was enough for him to really have health problems. And that mirrors a little bit of St. John Chrysostom's asceticism.
Right.
And then eventually he is presented as a theological mind. He already has studied rhetoric. He's already studied like philosophy and so on, has mastery of Greek. So he, like, all eyes are on him to become bishop. And he gets called and he is presented by St. Philoxenus of Nabog. And at the time, Emperor Anastasius has him become the Patriarch of Antioch after the Patriarch that was there, Chalcedonian Patriarch, was deposed. One of the first things that Severus does when he goes back is that he, instead of having a nice patriarchal residence, he picks a small room, lives in it like a cell. The patriarchal residence has a bunch of cooks that were cooking all kinds of like delicacies, and he essentially lets them all go and find work elsewhere, except for one person to just cook, because it shouldn't be that delightful, really. Like, you're still a monk even if you're a bishop. That was his mentality.
Thinking, yeah.
Stays in Antioch between the years 512 to 518, and that's when Emperor Anastasius dies, and we have a new emperor who did not exactly wasn't as fond of the non-Chalcedonians as Emperor Anastasius might have been. And all of a sudden, Philoxenus is captured, and he essentially, Severus is aware that Philoxenus gets captured, and Severus runs and comes to Egypt. He stays in Egypt for the remainder of his life, which he has 20 more years of life until he passes in 538. That's when he reposes, and he reposes in the house of an Egyptian archon, a man who was, taking care of church affairs in Sekha. And in the 20 years in between, and in the I think it was about 6 years that he spent as a patriarch, so we're talking about a 26-year career as a bishop / a bishop in exile. And the entire time he's there, he's not just writing against Chalcedon. He's writing against Chalcedon, and he's writing against dissident voices in the non-Chalcedonian camp as well. So he's writing against Julianism, which was a bit of an extremer form of speaking about the one nature, where his idea, or the Mia Thesis formula. So he essentially starts speaking of the body of Christ as incorruptible, or as suffering that which is not natural to it, that the body of Christ shouldn't suffer anything. But he kind of agrees to go through with it, rather than Severus's more concrete Christology, where no, he is fully human, and therefore when you beat a human being, the human being suffers. When you scourge him, that's what happens. He bleeds and he dies. Yes, he does all of that willingly, but it's not that he's doing something that's unnatural. He's doing something that is natural to the body, that is to suffer. And that is not what Julian was going for.
Right.
Julian was almost highlighting the divinity of Christ at the expense of the humanity of Christ.
That's right.
He's also writing to someone like Sergius, the Monophysite. Sergius is someone who's like properly speaking Monophysite. He is speaking of Christ as one essence, where divinity and humanity are mixed and mingled together, and divinity does not stay divinity and humanity does not stay humanity. They just kind of get compromised.
Produce something else
altogether. And St. Severus responds to that. And I think that's what makes St. Severus' Christology very unique, because it kind of saves the person reading it from all potential extremes, right? You could never read Severus and become Nestorian. You could never read Severus and become Eutychian. You could never read him and become willing to accept a form of an extreme Chalcedonian Christology, as what was seen for quite a bit of time in Rome, and especially between 451 at the Council of Chalcedon and the Fifth Ecumenical Council in the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, where things are mitigated a little bit after Chalcedon, when there is a realization that Chalcedon can be misunderstood. It's open for interpretation. Let's actually put some parameters.
Right.
And Severus is writing at that time against that extreme form of Chalcedonian Christology. But he's also writing against Sergius and Julian and Eutyches and so on, and he makes it so that you have that middle royal path where you're not falling too much into, the unity to the point of removing distinction between divinity and humanity, and you're not moving too hard in the point of distinction to the point of almost compromising the unity of Christ and separating him.
Yeah.
That's the briefest overview I've ever given of Severus. So yeah,
that's amazing. And why Egypt?
Well, it was a hub for the non-Chalcedonians, and we were the majority, obviously, at the time. So it just made sense, all things considered. Antioch is more divided like halfway. Like ancient Antioch is half Chalcedonian, half non-Chalcedonian. Egypt was more like 90% Chalcedonian, 10% Chalcedonian. I'm being generous here with the 10%.
And do you find in Antioch things happening like Cyrus of Caucasus going, like things like that happening where there is violence perpetrated against the non-Chalcedonians? Does that kind of stuff happen?
It happens, but I doubt it was to the same degree. Like in Antioch, you even see it in the letters of Severus. There's a bit of confusion among the people on to like, where do we go to pray? Do we go to this priest or that priest? Do we go like, what if the priest is non-Chalcedonian but known to be like a very immoral person? Do we go to the immoral one that is Orthodox, or the moral one who is considered heretical, be he Chalcedonian or Nestorian or any of these, right? And Severus says, no, you go to the Orthodox one, even if they are not as moral, because their morality is irrelevant. It's the faith that keeps things intact, right? So,
isn't that like an ancient heresy, like
Donatism?
Donatism.
Yeah.
That's it. About the validity of the sacraments and the morality of the presbyter, and
I think is a ridiculous
and taking it to
expectation.
the extreme, saying like that the sacrament itself is not valid because the sin of the presider.
Yeah.
Right. So what do we have from St Severus?
Yeah, we have quite a lot. So we have cathedral homilies, we have letters, we have responses, we have polemical writings. We have hymns attributed to him, but likely are not by him. They're likely just later attributions in honor of him, rather than actually composed by him, because they're composed in Syriac rhythm, and he was writing in Greek.
He was writing in Greek, okay.
Yes.
So, did he write in Syriac?
We don't have any evidence to say that he was.
So everything we have is Greek.
It's Greek, but he mostly survives in, like, his writings survive in Syriac, not in Greek.
And there's a reason for that.
Yes, there was an edict by Emperor Justinian outlawing all his writings.
So everything got destroyed.
Pretty much.
Oh, wow.
With the exception of a few things preserved in, like, when they had kind of manuscripts that have confessions of the fathers, and they put quotes from different people. Yeah. So Severus survives in one of those, and like in Greek in the original, and also in his in a catena, like a commentary on scripture that was put together in Alexandria, that was predominantly non-Chalcedonian, and you'll find Severus in there in Greek as well.
Very nice.
But otherwise, it's translations mostly made by John of Nisibis.
Why his writings, we don't find them in English or as readily available as other fathers? Is there a reason for that?
It's probably because the majority of Christian churches are not Chalcedonian. Are not non-Chalcedonian. So they are Chalcedonians, right? The Eastern Orthodox churches and the Roman Catholic churches, for whom Severus is not a saint.
Right.
And if you're going to start somewhere, you're probably going to start with people who are canonized in your church. Yes. He does not get translated to English, except much, much later.
Later, okay.
He's translated to French in quite a few places. So, for example, the Patrologia Orientalis will have him will have his writings in the Syriac, which is itself a translation, and below that you'll find the French.
And the Syriac translation was done by John, right? Yeah.
The French, I'm not exactly sure on the name of the person.
So did you do any work in Syriac for your dissertation?
I had to, yeah. I had to study Syriac enough to be able to translate like the parts I needed for my work, and also enough with the Greek to do the same with Maximus the Confessor. So that was probably the bulk of the work on my dissertation.
And is it easier to study Coptic or Syriac?
I mean, I've never studied Coptic in an academic setting. Like, I know how to read Coptic because of church, but I don't know if Syriac can come as naturally to the person, but if you know Arabic or Hebrew, Syriac is a piece of cake.
Right.
And if you know Arabic and Syriac, Hebrew will become a piece of cake. And if you know Syriac and Hebrew, like, you know, these three languages, if you know one or two of them, the other will be always a lot easier to learn.
Yeah. I found that out when I did a little bit of studies with biblical Hebrew, and I was very confused at first until I found the similarities and the differences and kind of like the rules between the two languages.
Yes.
And as soon as you figure those out, like, it clicks.
It just makes sense.
Yeah, your eyes are opened.
Yes.
So in the Synaxarium, we have St. Severus commemorated 3 times his arrival in Egypt, and that story in the second of Baba, and his departure and the relocation of his relics.
Yes.
Beyond that, there's and even in those stories, there's no mention of his Christological writings and his Christological vision and presentation, and his Christology is not something that is prominently featured in the 3 entries in the Synaxarium that are associated with him. So where does one start with St. Severus?
Sure. So naturally, the Synaxarium is about the stories. It's not about it's not about the theological writings, really. Like, you'll find the same thing with St. Athanasius and St. Cyril and so on. If one wants to start really doing a deep dive in Severus, if they know French, they have no problem. Just pull the Patrologia Orientalis and get all his letters and all his... Actually, his letters, a good chunk of them is translated in English, and it's available also public domain archives.
So available for free.
Yeah.
Yes.
And same thing with with the French translations of his homilies as well. These are all available. So if anyone is bilingual...
So letters and homilies are available in English?
Homilies in French, letters in English.
Homilies in French, letters in English. Very
yes.
nice.
And then there are certain parts of his primary writings that are available in translation in a volume on Severus of Antioch by the Early Church Fathers series. That's published by Pauline Allen and C.T. Hayward.
Yes.
And I'm recommending predominantly the primary translations as opposed to the discussion at the beginning. The discussion at the beginning has parts that I don't exactly think are a fair representation of Severus' Christology. But the primary sources are available. The translations are very, like, I had to confirm some of them and kind of cross-reference with the primary languages and whatnot is correct. It's good. It's
very good.
Excellent representation of the primary sources. And then one can also read the piece about Sergius, the correspondence between Severus and Sergius is all available in English. And
Sergius was the extreme Monophysite.
Yes. He's literally called Sergius the Monophysite.
The Monophysite.
Yes. And it's interesting because even with him, it's a correspondence of 3 letters back and forth, at the end of which Sergius simply acknowledges he made a mistake. I'm sorry, and life moves on.
Right.
And it's quite a great place to actually learn something about charity when doing theology, not just theology.
And as far as we know, Sergius is not excommunicated in any...
He's certainly not considered a saint at the church.
He's not a saint, but...
But I don't know if, like, he's certainly not mentioned the way, like, let's say Arius or Nestorius or Eutyches are mentioned.
Those are
as, like,
heresy, up there.
He's not like that, for sure. And this is actually available under a title, Christology after Chalcedon by Torrance.
Oh, by Torrance, okay.
Yeah. And then there is yet another book that one could read, and it's probably one of the best things that have ever been written about Severus. It's called Incorruptible Bodies. It talks about how there is a link between the Christology of Severus, his ecclesiology and understanding of the church, and his understanding of the patristic corpus as well. How all of these are bodies, and how these bodies have different levels of corruption. Where corruption here does not mean corruption in the sense of gone bad, but in the sense of, like, corruptibility, as in that there is room for a thing to have problems or not, or have pain or not. So when we talk about the body of Christ as corruptible, we don't mean that, God forbid, he has moral corruption. He's without sin, obviously, and is not touched by corruption in that sense. But it's in the sense of there is that level of openness to change. It can almost be used as an equivalent to changeability, that when you stab him, he bleeds. Right? When you pierce his side, he was bleeding.
Yes.
Right? That's a very human experience, and that is what corruptibility is about,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he talks about this in relation to Christ, church, patristic corpus, and sacraments and so on. And it's a very well written book by a scholar called Jonathan Moss, who is ironically not a Christian at all.
Really?
Yes.
And his presentation of St. Severus,
Excellent.
very
I couldn't have done it better.
wow, that's amazing. That's high
So-
praise.
Right. Like, and that's like, it's brilliant, and that's the beauty of academia, that in a way it really distinguishes between the person writing and what they're writing in a very professional way. That I'm not affected by someone writing about something not sharing my faith.
Someone
There's
writing
still
with
good in that
integrity.
if it's written with integrity. There is
Right.
room for, what we call the seeds of the logos to work and help the person, and there is obviously the academic method that ensures that the margin for error is really reduced as much as it's humanly possible.
Right. Amazing. I mean, Saint Severus has a prominent place in our church, liturgically speaking, in in the Synaxarium, and among the pantheon of fathers. But in all the years that I've been priest, I've encountered names like Basil, John, Cyril in children when I'm baptizing, but never Severus.
Well, it's because Severus Snape ruined it for us.
Severus? Say that again?
Severus Snape from Harry Potter, the series. Nobody hears Severus and thinks Severus of Antioch. People hear Severus and think Severus Snape. Obviously thinks Harry Potter.
Harry Potter ruined it for us.
Yep, that's why I don't... Like, if it weren't for that, I would have called my firstborn child Severus, 100%.
Severus. Wow.
But
thank you so much for a wonderful presentation of Saint Severus. I mean, it just makes me want to read more of his writings and get into his mind and his thoughts. And this is one person that, like you mentioned, like you read and it saves you from falling into one extreme or the other. Like, this is a very balanced father and monastic, but and at the same time very theologically astute, to the point that he's able to walk this very fine line and not fall into error. I mean, like, talking about Christology and being able to kind of delineate extreme monophysitism from extreme, from like kind of presenting things that most of us, think about with a sort of like distance. Like, we don't want to approach it too closely, because we know, like, the more we approach, the higher the likelihood we're going to fall into error. Whereas with Saint Severus, like, this is something that he's very comfortable speaking about, and not just speaking about in general, but getting into the weeds and into the nitty gritty. And one can assume that his study, wherever it was, and part of it I believe was in Alexandria, but one can only assume that his study prepared him for this kind of challenge.
yes, absolutely.
Right? It's not just the fact that he was a very ascetic person and a very holy person and righteous and pious person, but his study did prepare him, and it did play a huge role in his life. So in one sense, he was, he straddles both worlds, the monastic world and the world of theology and academia. So would he be considered like a desert father, or more of, the patristic theological? Does he have any writings, like writings of the desert fathers, like
one-liners and mic drops.
Exactly.
The mic drops. No, he doesn't have those, as far as I know. But he's often reached out to give advice to monastics, deacons, priests, and so on, and that's where you see that pastoral side of him. And you find even his own, human growth and development. Like, he talks about how, when I was a monastic, I applied all kinds of like rigors and rules and was by the book. But the moment I started being a shepherd, I had to exercise a more pastoral approach, be kinder to the flock, and so on. Like, if someone had a right to, like, completely shun away everyone, let's say from the Chalcedonian church, trying to come to the Oriental Orthodox Church, or the non-Chalcedonian Church at the time, it would have been Severus. Like, the man had a very difficult time as a patriarch. He has a very difficult time as a person who's like literally a refugee in Egypt and so on. And all of that is thanks to, you know, the Chalcedonian persons in power, be they emperors or patriarchs or bishops or any of that. But in spite of that, he actually stands up against those who are saying that you must rebaptize or you must even rechristmate a Chalcedonian person coming back to the non-Chalcedonian church. And for him, it's like, no, you don't do that, because that's not how it works, and that's not what St Cyril did when there was a schism between Alexandria and Antioch, and that is not what we're supposed to do. What we're supposed to do is take a charitable approach. So you see his growth from a more extreme to a more balanced figure, from the monastic to the bishop, and how that is really done in a very nuanced way. He's not just a Christology major, you know. He's a shepherd. He's a bishop. He's
a father. He's
pastoral. He's pastoral. He gets up and gives beautiful sermons. Does exegesis in a way not too far from John Chrysostom. The idea of taking a passage from the Bible and looking at all the possible lessons that you can apply in your day-to-day life. Like, I think one of my dreams is to actually one day translate all of his cathedral homilies, because how relevant they are is almost as relevant as John Chrysostom's homilies to this day, that you can, like, for my fathers, the priests, they can always go and, you know, consult that and use it and get ideas from there. It's so relevant.
And as it stands today, these homilies are only in Syriac.
And French.
Okay.
So if you know French.
Oui.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Okay.
Excellent. It only makes me want to read St. Severus even more. And I understand that you spent one summer just reading everything there is to know about St. Severus.
Yes.
I'm sure like it was a summer like no other.
Yes, absolutely.
And
one of the best summers of my life.
You immersed yourself in.
Yeah.
Are you the only person that you know of studying St. Severus, or the other people from the Coptic Orthodox Church?
There are many people
studying St. Severus
who definitely have had topics that touch on St. Severus. There are people who are far ahead of me, like, for example, Dr. Yohanan C. Youssef. He did a lot of work on Severus. There is a monk priest whose name escapes me, unfortunately. I believe he's a monk priest. He wrote he wrote the Lover of Truth, which is one of the books written by Severus of Antioch, and translated it to Arabic and published it with an introduction. There are quite a few people who have invested the time in studying Severus in different languages and different cultures and so on, like between Egypt and here and the States and Australia and so on.
And is there interest in St. Severus outside of theological studies, in religious studies?
Well, Dr. Yonatan Moss, the one who wrote that book on incorruptible bodies, I think he's from a Jewish background. And he wrote about St. Severus of Antioch. So there is an interest. There's generally an interest in re-exploring Oriental Orthodoxy on its own terms. And I think that's a very good move and a very good shift in the right direction that academia is seeing today. It's that whole like principle of charity being applied. Let's not assume that anything written in a secondary source is true. Let's actually read what the people write. I think that should be extended to everybody. Like, we should do that with our Chalcedonian brothers and sisters, our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, Eastern Orthodox, Protestant, Reformed, anyone really. Even people from other faith traditions. You know, like one of the beautiful things about being in religious studies for a while was that I got to see the good in the faith traditions I might have grown up hearing only negative about. I was able to see aspects of beauty, aspects of... I certainly don't believe all religions to be the same, or that all religions are equally valid.
Good.
None of that. Yeah. But I can, see God at work to a level, to a degree. Surely not as at the degree of, the Logos incarnate being partaken of on the altar that I have as an Orthodox Christian. But there is something there that I can see. Yes, there are question marks. There are things I see as errors, or else I wouldn't be not part of said faith traditions. But there is something to be seen there that is good. And that happens when you see people on their own terms and you hear them on their own terms.
So it's definitely a move in the right direction to kind of start seeing Oriental Orthodox and more generally speaking, like the Eastern mind and thought and writings on its own terms,
Absolutely.
within its own context. Absolutely.
And my thing has been reading the primary sources more so than the secondary one. Secondary ones are good. They're a good introduction. They're a good, kind of refresher. They get your feet on the water, but
they just give you kind of like the basic facts and what to look for and all that.
But you've got to do a deep dive in the primary sources and just live with the saint you're reading or the figure that you're reading.
So you mentioned that term a few times, primary and secondary sources. What's the difference?
So if you're reading Severus of Antioch in his book Lover of Truth, or his books and his correspondence with Sergius the Monophysite, that's a primary source. If you're reading the introduction about him by Pauline Allen, or you're reading Incorruptible Bodies, these are secondary sources. They are writing about somebody else, hence secondary.
Secondary, right?
Yeah.
So secondary sources, while helpful or could be potentially helpful, you always need to go with primary sources.
Absolutely, because there are times where it's like, academics are human. Sometimes they will write something and it's not going to entirely reflect the tradition, or sometimes they are more influenced by secondary traditions in other languages than what they're actually seeing in primary sources. So in a way, the secondary source can blind you to something that's right there in the primary source. Right. But also it can help you see something that you may have missed, because that's the whole communal aspect of academia. You can never do academia alone. Right. You have to have supervisors, books.
Yeah, so within that tradition, within community, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. With St. Severus, it showed us that the non-Chalcedonians are not monolithic in their thinking. It's not all like all of us, we think the same way. This is exactly what... Like there were extremes, different kinds of extremes within the non-Chalcedonian camp.
And the Chalcedonian camp, and every camp.
And I was going to ask about that. What about in the Chalcedonian camp?
So in the Chalcedonian camp, for example, the sleepless monks, who were a collection of monks that, as the name suggests, tried their best to sleep as little as possible, were around the schedule so that there's always someone awake to pray. And lack of sleep seems to have compromised their theological abilities. So they end up saying things like, they don't end up acknowledging that you can speak of one of the Trinity, that is the Son of God, suffering in flesh, because it suggests to them that this must mean that divinity itself, as a substance, has suffered, which is impossible. But obviously that's not what anyone who says one of the Trinity suffered for us is really trying to say.
Theopaschite.
That's the Theopaschite language, exactly.
Yeah.
And there is that whole kind of aversion to that language, and it's seen as problematic, but obviously eventually the majority rules against that. You have people in the Chalcedonian tradition. There are a lot of caricatures that are sometimes we paint of people in other traditions, and sometimes people in the tradition paint about themselves. So for example, or
different camps within the same tradition, and of course
exactly. And you see that, for example, with the whole question of the two energies and two wills, for example. You look at the two energies thing, and people assume that Chalcedonian tradition always spoke of two energies. But then Maximus, who was among the first people to actually outline what that means, acknowledges that there are people who spoke in terms of one. And he's uncertain, the book is incomplete. He's referring to a particular figure that wrote a book that speaks of one energy. And he's unsure. His own spiritual father, Sophronius of Jerusalem, is speaking about two energies, but there's also a power that takes a middle position that is not entirely divine, not entirely human. So, the idea that it was always so clear and clean, and they moved from two natures to two wills and two energies, no problems, and everybody
just agreed and went along with it.
It does not work.
History's not that tidy.
No. And the amount of times that people claim that, and then you read the primary sources and it says precisely the opposite, is really the reason why I tell people often to just read the primary source. Severus of Antioch, allegedly someone who speaks of everything one because he's part of the Oriental tradition. There's a quote where he speaks about the two wills in Christ.
Right.
So what do you make of that? You have to read him on his terms, understand what he means by what he's saying, the different ways he uses that term, that technical term,
Right.
and try and understand him in the most charitable way. Same thing with Maximus. People assume he's speaking always about two, but there are times where he's speaking about a mode of willing, right, where the two wills as faculties are interacting with each other,
Right.
in a united way, without them being opposed to one another, which is totally aligned with what Severus says elsewhere. Ironically, there are times in the course of writing my dissertation where Maximus and Severus were closer to one another than they were to their own predecessors in their own tradition.
Wow.
And that speaks volumes about how not so clean and tidy history can be.
So I wanted to move on to why Maximus the Confessor. And first of all, Maximus the Confessor is a saint in Eastern Orthodox Church.
And Roman Catholic as well.
And Roman Catholic as well.
Yeah.
What century did he live?
He lived in the 7th century.
7th century, okay.
Yeah.
So did they ever correspond?
No. Severus has passed before
Before
Maximus had any ecclesial career of any sorts.
Okay.
But the thing is, Maximus writes against Severus at times, and says
specifically,
like, yes,
yeah,
by name in some of his letters, by name, not very kindly, but that's fine.
So he did read his work, his letters, discourses, or at least hear of them.
Probably heard of them. I don't know if he actually read anything that was like properly speaking by Severus, because the reason for me questioning it is there are times where he attributes to Severus things that just were never really part of what we have from Severus.
Yeah.
Also, what we know is that Maximus knew predominantly Greek, and at that time Severus' writings in Greek have been largely lost. So how can you really be talking about it? So you find him say like broad strokes of what Severus has said, but without the nuance, and therefore it's just like misrepresented.
So it's like hearsay, like secondhand.
Almost. That's how I read it, at least. I'm not saying that I know for sure, but that's how I read it. Yeah.
And when you say that they were closer to each other, can you give us an example of that than their own, predecessors?
So, for example, the question I just said about the wills, is one of them.
Yeah.
Like, to find Maximus speak of one mode of willing, even though he's speaking of two wills, and you find Severus speaking of two wills, is like, wow, like that was a shocker for me. The question of energies, how is it that Christ acts? So both of them make a big deal about the walking on water.
Yeah.
To walk is human. To walk on water is certainly not human.
Yes.
It's a very divine intervention thing. It's defying gravity.
Right.
And both cite that to say that Christ, the divine element is in action, the human element is in action, but in union, and you cannot separate.
Inseparable.
That reality, that one reality is inseparable, the reality of that action. The other thing is that you find most of the times when the non-Chalcedonians, especially Severus, the one I specialized in, and Maximus on the Chalcedonian side, when they speak of something like will, for example, or energy, most of the times, the non-Chalcedonians are saying this about a movement from the person to the end result. Most of the times when the Chalcedonians are speaking about this, they're speaking about faculties embedded in nature that are activated by the person.
Faculties embedded in nature.
Yes.
Activated by the person, okay.
Which means that if our Chalcedonian brothers and sisters defined the will as a faculty of nature and spoke of one will, we would in fact be the ones to call them heretical. Okay?
Right.
Because they would be either reducing the divine or the human in Christ. Right. Similarly, if they understand us to be speaking of will and energy as a movement as opposed to a faculty, and we're speaking of two,
right,
then we've become Nestorian.
Yeah.
We've separated Christ.
Yeah.
We're speaking about two separate movements at this point. So that's where Severus and Maximus are key. And I think the reason Severus and Maximus are so close is because Severus and Maximus have the unique thing of having written against extreme voices in their own camp. When you have that self-critical kind of methodology, of looking at people in your own camp, and you say, this is right, this is wrong. And even if my friend is saying it and it's wrong,
it gives credibility
wrong,
to your work.
It gives credibility to the work, and it makes you open to the orthodoxy that might be found in the other camp that can help you. So, for example, Maximus would say that you cannot have an orthodox Christological faith without speaking about one Christ in two natures, which is the Chalcedonian formula, but also the one incarnate nature of God the Word, which is the Cyrillian formula. That's the old, and you use one against the Nestorian extreme, and you use the other against the Eutychian extreme.
Yeah.
Severus begins his career not allowing the two nature language, but when Sergius enters the stage, he starts seeing the value in it.
Oh.
He might not say one in two natures, but he starts seeing the value in speaking in these terms in a way that ensures that people understand that
So
divinity and humanity continue.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
We don't end up in that error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's once you realize that there is value in what the other has in order to protect against an error, that you might have had that error in your blind spot with voices here and there in the tradition as history develops. That's when you're actually becoming more open-minded and willing to see Christ at work in different churches, different church fathers. And there's so much more beauty in that than having to sit there and say, only we got it right, everybody else got it wrong.
Right.
It almost limits Christ and limits the work of the Spirit, which we as human beings are in no position to do.
It's like cheapens the faith. It reduces it to something like, tribalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Timothy II of Alexandria is a classic example of that. He's asked a question, and he's like, someone, simple, layperson, wants to come to church, commune with us. This is like amidst the Chalcedonian controversy. According to sources, there are 10,000 Copts that have been killed for picking Timothy II as patriarch. Like, it's chaos in Alexandria. And people don't know
10,000.
which church to go. Yeah. Like, just for choosing their patriarch. And Copts are accused of killing Proterius and, like, literally, like, dismantling his body and his corpse. And, like, it's an ugly time. If there is a time to be tribalistic, it is this time.
Yeah.
Right? And Timothy is not writing from like a nice villa somewhere. He's literally in exile in the middle of nowhere, away from his flock. The only way to correspond with them is letters. They ask him, a simple layperson comes into our church, used to be Chalcedonian, wants to join our church. What do we do? He says to them, if that person believes in the Trinity, consubstantial, three persons, one essence, and believes that Christ is one with us in humanity, take that person, commune them, and do not burden them with verbal subtleties. End of story.
Yeah.
I wonder how often we're willing to have that prescription today when we are dealing with our brothers and sisters from, let's say, the Eastern Orthodox Church. In fact, sometimes what I see is fear, and I see it on both sides. Like, there is the fear of like, oh no, like the youth will become Eastern Orthodox, or oh no, the youth will become Oriental Orthodox. It's like, they can, maybe they don't share the Eucharist because there is value in, fasting from the Eucharist and repentance for the sin of schism until we're able to celebrate together the removal of that sin of the schism. But, sharing pizza while reading patristics is completely okay. Like, we've allowed more in the past, in the time of St. Timothy. Why not that today? Oh, yeah.
But also not to paint the history in kind of like this rosy glow. There were controversies in terms of acceptance of the lapses and people who have lapsed in their faith, and how do we accept them? And some people thinking like we have to rebaptize, some saying no, we don't repeat the baptism, and all sorts of things. And there were episodes in history where things are kind of an example to emulate, but there are also episodes where it's lessons to learn, like don't do this because it's not good, it doesn't end well.
Severus was presented with exactly what you just said, and there are letters about this where his thing was, you cannot like actually cite the more fundamentalist. You need to cite the most ecumenical position from the fathers in order to invite more people into the church. That was the move. It was to be as pastoral as possible. We often assume the fathers were fundamentalists, but no. In fact, it was the voices of the people that were saying you must rebaptize or rechristmate someone who's left the church and is coming back. He called them the self-created religion of the rebaptizers, which was his way of insulting them.
Self-created.
Yeah.
That's an insult, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or would like use stronger language to describe that in intensity, and would say that if you have two positions and one of them is more pastoral than the other, stick with the pastoral. That's what Severus would say.
And on that very pastoral and very charitable position, I'd like to thank you for your time and your
pleasure.
insights, and I hope to have many more conversations with you. And there are so many more questions I have for you, especially on your work in ecumenical circles and ecumenism. And I know you have done a lot of work in that regard, as well as your work as a chaplain. There's so much more to talk about. So thank you so much for
thank you for having
being
me
here and being part of this conversation. And keep writing, keep producing. It's good stuff, and look forward to more.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to more conversations.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. For questions, comments, feedback, or if you'd like to make a suggestion on a topic for a future episode, please feel free to reach out to the email in the bio. And don't forget to subscribe to get a notification when new episodes drop. God bless you, and have a great day.